Breaking news today. Erica Frantz, a political scientist, paints a bleak picture of life in Russia after Putin. Associate Professor of Political Science at Michigan State University and author of several books on the topic, Erica Frantz has been researching and writing about authoritarian regimes for over 15 years. A database of nearly 300 authoritarian regimes around the world since 1946 has been compiled by her and her co-authors. Using this information, the researchers have analyzed the causes and consequences of the collapse of various autocracies, including the frequency with which their leaders were deposed after initiating wars and the fates of their countries after their leaders' deaths. Margarita Lyatova, a special correspondent for Meduza, recently discussed the implications of her research for Russia's future with France. Advantages of elections for autocrats. What insights into modern autocracies can we glean from the past? Dictatorship can be understood in broad strokes by focusing on a few defining characteristics. The results of having, say, a military junta in power are fairly consistent regardless of whether it is in Asia or Latin America. The role of the security forces and the existence of the incumbent party are two of the primary structures that I consider. Is the security apparatus truly part of the government, or does the leader have complete control over it? These two dimensions usually play a significant role. First and foremost, whether or not there is a body that can restrain the leader is an important factor to consider. The second factor is whether or not the body in question has been militarized. The combination of these two causes many potential outcomes worth considering. The modern autocrat holds elections for what reason? The first is that the international community has been pushing for elections. Opinion polls show that the vast majority of citizens, as well as influential members of the political establishment, agree that democracy is the best form of government. That's a debate about the accepted norm. A lot of foreign aid, for instance, is given to countries if they hold elections, so it seems plausible. As a result, governments around the world are now aware of this, and even the most authoritarian regimes hold elections on a regular basis. There is a correlation between the frequency of coups and other factors, such as whether or not the dictatorship is receiving foreign aid. To that end, there is, on the one hand, international pressure as well as incentives. However, messages can also be sent to domestic audiences through these elections. Elections in authoritarian regimes are often portrayed as competitive despite the fact that they are not. Even if these groups are engaging in other forms of cheating and winning, this still sends a message of legitimacy for the regime, that they have the support of the people and so on. Furthermore, a substantial body of literature demonstrates that dictatorships that hold regular elections and permit multiple parties to compete tend to last longer. Therefore, doing so is beneficial to their continued existence. How come? Do people believe they're elected officials after an election? Authoritarian regimes often have access to substantial resources, which they use to guarantee victory. In many cases, only minor forms of overt fraud are necessary. The exact mechanism by which having elections leads to more stable authoritarianism is the subject of scholarly debate. In order to ensure a successful electoral showing, the regime will use elections as an opportunity to reward its loyal supporters with special privileges. Authoritarian leaders often use elections as a means of showing public support for the regime. Calorie consumption was higher in Egypt under Mubarak, according to studies conducted before the 2011 election. The bread supply was increased. There are numerous measures taken by governments to guarantee success. Elections also provide opportunities for less prominent members of the regime to demonstrate their ability to rally support for the ruling party. They can inform the regime on the most populous areas of the opposition. Thus, elections also involve the dissemination of information. A recipe for anarchy, indeed. When do you think autocratic leaders typically lose power, and why? As you've shown, it's not always the end of a regime when a leader steps down from power. Yes, we are aware that the survival of the leader and the regime are not always intertwined. About half of the time that a leader has fallen from power in the post-World War II era, They have simply been replaced, and their regime has continued. When the leader is deposed, the regime collapses 50% of the time. However, we must not make the naive assumption that a change in leadership will result in the collapse of the current government. The nature of the regimes varies significantly from one another. One can infer the manner of their demise based on their character type. Military regimes, which were common during the Cold War but are less common today, were typically the shortest of all dictatorship and ended in negotiations where their leaders stepped down from power. And the atmosphere that is produced through bargaining is highly conducive to democratic rule. Therefore, military dictatorship have the greatest potential for democratization. And there are numerous instances of this in Latin America.